Howdy folks, welcome back to Steampunk Desperado channel. Today I'm going to go back to my roots and talk about a work of steampunk fiction. Particularly, it's a work of steampunk horror. Now, though I love science fiction, fantasy, westerns, and so forth, typically I'm not as much of a horror fan, unless it comes to classic horror, such as vampires, werewolves, swamp things, and zombies, etc. Those are my kind of scary stories. Perhaps it's because the more modern horror that features psychopaths that and mass killers, that kind of thing, those are scary because they're potentially real. Anyway, the particular novel in question is about vampires, and it's a testament to the author's skill that he can make this very fanciful subject matter chilling. The book is Anno Dracula by Kim Newman, 1992, Simon & Schuster. Vampires have long been one of my obsessions, starting with the most famous vampire of them all, Count Dracula. I've probably read at least 50 vampire books of one sort or another, some of them classic, like Carmilla, for example, and pretty much a lot of them were modern takes, all except this one. And you know what I mean, because it's not my thing. I'm going to refer you to the review that Mrs. Desperado and I did back last fall about the 10 different versions of the Dracula story we watched on film. And we had to get something that was fairly close. We didn't want all these weird spin-offs, And although a lot of them did depart fairly much from the original. It was great fun, though, and you should see it. I'll also add some links to some of my other reviews of vampire-related fiction. I would classify Anno Dracula as steampunk. Now, there are many manifestations of steampunk fiction. It's kind of a vague category. I recognize three types, and Anno Dracula kind of falls into two of them. One is alt history sci-fi set in the 19th and early 20th century, and it kind of goes with that. Second is fantasy or far future settings, featuring societies with steam technology, clockwork, airships, Victorian type societies. Doesn't fit that one at all. And the third, science fiction stories written as if by a writer in the Victorian era. And it fits this one very well because it is a sequel to a classic, that is Bram Stoker's Dracula. As I said, Anno Dracula does follow the characters and events of Bram Stoker's 1897 novel, much like K.W. Jeter's Morlock Night is a sequel to H.G. Wells' 1895 novella, The Time Machine. Unlike Morlock Night, however, which proceeds logically from the events of Time Machine, Anno Dracula starts with the premise that Dracula had a different ending. Professor Van Helsing and his crew did not chase Dracula back to Transylvania. They did not drive a stake through the creature's heart, and they did not save Mina Harker from his evil clutches. No, all of that stuff went wrong. Instead, Dracula survives. He continues recruiting followers and making new vampires, and eventually he meets, vampirizes, and marries Queen Victoria, making himself Prince Consort of the Empire. Now Dracula begins a reign of terror, bringing in his Wallachian Guard. And this is a band of Eastern European vampires who are very cruel. They're not refined at all. They just take what they want, and they treat humans as completely expendable. They are Dracula's enforcers. Van Helsing is caught, executed, and his head put on a pike outside Windsor Castle. Mina Harker becomes Dracula's concubine, one of many, and Harker has to hide from Dracula's operatives. Dr. Seward is featured prominently in this story, which I'll get into later, and many of the characters, some from the Dracula story, accept the vampire's kiss, which converts them to the undead state. Those who refuse to do that or aren't selected continue to provide a food source for the elite who rule Britain, the vampires. Though most vampires take only what they need, leaving the victims alive so they can feed again, people like the Wallachian Guard, they will just completely devastate. They don't care. And the other thing is that vampires cannot reproduce, so Humans are necessary to replenish their number for those who, fall by the wayside. It's a terrifying scenario, but also very entertaining. It's made more enjoyable by including many other vampires from classic fiction, such as Varney, Count Orlok, Lord Ruthven, Anne Rice's Lestat, and many, many more. Other fictional characters include Dr. Jekyll, Dr. Moreau, Fu Manchu, Sweeney Todd, and a cast of dozens, at least. Several characters appear from the Sherlock Holmes stories, such as his brother Mycroft and Inspector Lestrade, who has become a vampire recently, voluntarily. Holmes himself has been sent to a prison camp, and the author says this is because Holmes probably would have solved the mystery, the central mystery of the book, too quickly. Can't have that happen. There are other real historical characters, besides Victoria, that is. There's Alfred Tennyson, Charles Darwin, Oscar Wilde, Beatrice Potter, that's the social reformer, not the writer of Peter Rabbit, Jack the Ripper, and the real-life urban legend, Spring-Heeled Jack. Bram Stoker's wife, Florence, is also a character, though Stoker himself has gone missing. The most significant protagonist is the French vampire Genevieve Dieudonné, hard to say. She has been undead for even longer than Dracula, and so she's an elder. She is forever a beautiful 16-year-old girl. Unlike most of the other vampires, I didn't remember her from anything else. That's because she is Newman's creation, and she appears in the Warhammer Fantasy universe. She is also an ethical vampire. She only takes blood given willingly, and at the start of the novel, has never chosen to vampirize any human being. She works at a shelter for the newly converted, that is, the newborn vampires, which have become a huge social problem in London. By custom, an undead elder is supposed to be responsible as a tutor and guide to any humans they turn to the vampire state. But a lot of these new vampires, they just disregard that and just discard their converts like refuse. And so it's become a huge social problem. And the clinic is run by Dr. Seward, who also is a major character in the Dracula series, on the Dracula novel. The other major character is Charles Beauregard, which is also a creation of Newman's, not from another story. Beauregard works on behalf of the Diogenes Club, an organization that comes from the Sherlock Holmes books. And he's trying to solve a series of murders that bedeviled the London police, both the warm and the undead. The public has dubbed the perpetrator Jack the Ripper. And in real life, he targets the ladies of the evening. But in this case, only vampires, only vampire streetwalkers. And due to the resilience of their kind, the murder weapon is a knife made of silver. The reader finds out rather early who the Ripper is, but I'm not going to spoil it by mentioning it here. The plot of this book involves several interlocking problems. One is Dracula's increasingly oppressive and arbitrary reign. Just one example, since he hates gays so much, he declares homosexuality to be a capital crime, even targeting some of his own Wallachian guard. Oscar Wilde had better watch out. Genevieve despises Dracula and his crew, stating that the vampire's cruelty is passed on through his corrupt and wicked bloodline. Another is the way that social climbers gravitate towards the vampire elite, converting in droves because it's the only way to advance. This becomes personal for Charles Beauregard because his fiancée insists they must be converted soon as they are married. Not only does Charles find this distasteful, but he wants to start a family, something that vampires cannot do. He's also an unofficial investigator into the Ripper murders on behalf of the Diogenes Club, who is also working secretly for the police and the government. An interesting switch, since the book's most successful vampire hunter becomes one of its primary villains. Ironically, while being increasingly estranged from his beloved and beautiful fiancée, Charles meets Genevieve and finds her utterly captivating. Will he make the switch after all? You need to read it and find out. As I was going through this book, I noticed some of the features of the Dracula regime that seemed strangely familiar. If it hadn't been written in the 1990s, I might have thought it was a metaphor for current events somewhere. At least aspects of it seemed strangely familiar. Foreigners, in this case Dracula and his fellow Wallachians, are privileged over native Britons, and reverse discrimination is the order of the day. It's official civil service policy never to promote a warm blood when a vampire is available to fill the role. Culture and social custom have been upended for the newcomers, and all business happens at night. So, as I said, this is a parallel. This is not meant to be saying anything about vampires in England. Criticism of government policy is not tolerated, and you can end up in prison. Does that really happen? Maybe. In the books, of course, Sherlock Holmes is one of those who was put away. Obviously, things aren't nearly that bad in the current year, but I couldn't resist being a little bit snarky about it. Whatever the message, it is all great fun. This is my favorite form of steampunk, a mashup of real and fictional Victoriana in one grand adventure. I hardly recommend it on that premise alone. And I was in a rush to review it, even though I haven't read any of the 6 sequels, which extend the story all the way into the 21st century. And of course, Genevieve does not age, so I assume she's in all of them. And I will almost certainly read them at some point. This is my review of the first in the Anno Dracula series, Anno Dracula, by Kim Newman. Please comment what you think below, and please like and subscribe. Also, check out my works on Amazon. I will have the links in the description, including that to my very latest and greatest, Hunter's Wager, which is a cyberpunk fairy tale. I think it's pretty cool. I hope you like it too. It's a little violent, but cyberpunk tends to be that way, doesn't it? For now, this is Steampunk Desperado saying adios amigos from the Steampunk Desperado channel, where the past meets the future and the present is extraordinary.